morning, folks. My name is Rachel Wilkins. Welcome to Coffee with Artists. I'm super excited this morning. I have a fellow countryman joining me today. Matthew Burrows is an artist based in the south of England. He got his undergrad at Birmingham School of Arts and his master's degree in painting from the Royal College of Art in London. And he's globally exhibited and also a lecturer at the National Gallery of London. Most importantly, though, and this is something we're going to be talking about, he is the founder and the ideas man behind the Artist Support Pledge, which is an amazing viral initiative that is encouraging artists to support other artists. So welcome to the show, Matthew. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for inviting me to be on, and good morning to the US.
And it is, of course, good afternoon to you, since you are in a different time zone. So I wanted, before we dive into kind of the meaning behind this amazing initiative that you have, that you kind of put together, I want to talk a little bit about your background, your work, and just a little bit about your journey to getting to the point where you are today. So you're originally from the Wirral in the Northwest, which is about 20, 30 minutes from where I'm from. But you did relocate to the South, I imagine, for your education. Tell us how environment has impacted your work. I noticed on your website you said painting is a form of subsistence dependent on and arising from the ground at his feet. So talk about a little bit how landscape has informed your creative practice.
Yeah, well, I moved, I grew up very much influenced by the landscape around where I lived, and my family originally part of my family from Cumbria. So the idea of landscape's always been significant in my life. And then probably about 10 years ago, we moved out of London, where I'd lived for nearly 20 years. And I now live in the countryside in East Sussex. And one of my great passions in life, apart from painting, is ultra running, which I know there's a big ultra running scene in America. And I spend a lot of time running, a lot of time in the countryside. And I'd noticed over the years of doing this that actually it had a very large impact on the way I thought about painting and the way I thought about being an artist and the way I thought about how I related to the environment and connected to the environment. So over time, it's sort of become what I sort of realized in a way is that actually, whatever you do as a painter, it's kind of got to manifest in everything you do in your life. So the way I run through the landscape, the way I think of it as a sort of drawing with my feet, that the way I draw with my feet is the same as the way I draw with my hand. And that creates a kind of connectivity and a sort of set of relationships and values that has influenced my work, my life, but also Artist Support Pledge. So the concept of Artist Support Pledge actually came from ideas derived from hunter-gatherer societies, which are very connected to the landscape. So I derived the economic model from those sorts of sort of cultures rather than from our own.
So I'm interested in the kind of the parallels between running and creating art, and very unusually, the artist that I interviewed yesterday was also a runner, and she talked about there being a lot of similarities in how she approached the work, in that she thought of it in the sense that you don't have to always go out and run your best mile, right? You don't have to go out and create a masterpiece every single time that you create. Can you tell us a little bit about the parallels and the contrasts for you?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think one of the things that's noticeable about sort of the ultra running community is that it is a sort of community, and although it's by definition a sport, it's very much a culture, and it has its own sort of customs and values and sort of sets of relationships that go on within its culture. And it's less. What's interesting about it is that although it's by many standards it's sort of an extreme sport, what you recognize in the activity of it is the connection between the participants. So a lot of people talk about it being a community sport rather than a team sport or an individual sport. So when you're running, and that kind of activity of moving through space and moving through a landscape at not only kind of often extreme landscapes, but at the extreme of your capacity physically, you sort of have to come to terms with your own vulnerability, your own relationship to your body, to the way you feel about that, to the landscape you're in, and you have to derive energy from that landscape. And I think one of the things that a lot of ultra runners talk about, and for me is very influential on painting, is how do you derive that energy from it? And in a way, you know, when you tell people you do these sort of very long distance runs, you know, up to 100 miles, the first thing they say is, well, doesn't it hurt? Or, you know, aren't you scared when you do something like that?
Why?
Yeah. It does a little bit, but you realize that if you think about it differently, the pain is not all that bad. And actually, fear is a kind of form of energy. It allows you to become more aware, and to, in that awareness, you draw something new and a kind of understanding that you don't have when you're in a position of comfort. So I think that, in a way, is a parallel for me to painting. That as a painter, when you enter the studio, you put yourself into a position of discomfort, and arguably a position of fear, because you don't really know what you're doing each day. You don't know where it's going to take you. You don't know whether it's going to be success or it's going to be a failure. And more often than not, it's a failure. So you've got to deal with that consistently. And actually, I think that's where it has a sort of parallel. That there's that the journey, the narrative is very similar, and also the sense that it's a kind of embodied experience. It's not just an activity that is outside of yourself as a human biological entity with thoughts and feelings, but all of those things have to coalesce in some way. And in painting, that might happen through the structure of the painting, through marks, shapes, colors, forms. And in running, it's the dialogue of your pace, the heartbeat, the rhythm and the structure of the landscape, and the relationship to how you move through it, as the strategies you use to get through that, and the way you understand your body's relationship to that, and then how you then derive energy from that and inspiration from that. So I didn't sort of start running thinking it was an inspiration for painting, but it's and I don't go out running thinking that's what I'm doing, but I've realized in a way that the experience of running long distances is so profound on how you think and feel about the world, yourself, your community, the ground at your feet, that actually that's where you derive your values. And interestingly, even the word culture comes from the idea of tilling the land. So all cultures ultimately derive from the ground at our feet. So if we can actually understand our connectivity with that ground, it beds our understanding and our cultural values in something that is plausible and real and tangible and complex. So, you know, one of the things I often say to myself, if I'm ever stuck with my work or I'm struggling to get inspiration, is I kind of say, well, the ground at my feet is just as beautiful, just as complex, just as intricate, just as sophisticated, just as worthy of interest as it is anywhere else. So actually, my failure to not see that is a failure of imagination. And as soon as you sort of see it that way, it kind of opens up, and the ground suddenly becomes exciting and interesting again. And a speck of dust can become a universe in itself. So in a way, I think there's always this sense that somehow over there is going to be more interesting. You know, in the next field is going to be more interesting. Or if I go to another country, it'll be more interesting. But actually, the ground at your feet is just as interesting. And also, I think it kind of, for me, it's links with this sort of idea of subsistence painting and sustainable painting and sustainable practice as an artist, because I link that for me, it's kind of linked with a sort of ideas of environmentalism, that actually, if you can find value in the ground at your feet, if you can find sustenance emotionally and physically and spiritually from that ground, then actually it reconnects you with that ground, and you find that ground special. And if you think that ground's special, you don't abuse it. You don't abuse what you find special. And it's too easy to abuse the things that we distance and we put over there and we package away. So for me, that kind of engagement and connectivity with the landscape is a kind of form of environmentalism. It's about saying, actually, if we just change our values, reconnect with the ground at our feet, then actually it then becomes possible to speak of a culture that can be environmentally sustainable. Because if we're always making an effort to be environmentally sustainable, we'll wear ourselves out with that effort. Mm-hmm. But if it's intrinsically built within our value system and how we relate to it, it just seamlessly flows along. And whatever we do is a product of it. So for me, that's why, you know, painting, running, my relationship to the environment, the ground at my feet, it's all intrinsically interlinked.
Is there an element of a higher sense of consciousness from either of these practices, I guess you could call them?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of, not jokingly, but almost flippantly call it a kind of mystical realism. And I'm fully aware when I say that people will misunderstand it. So my caveat to that is that when I sort of talk about mysticism, I'm not talking about sort of head in the clouds kind of sort of fantasy. I'm talking about absolute reality. That if you can genuinely connect with who you are, where you are, when you are, who you are with, that's the ultimate sort of mystical experience, because then you are wholly you, where you are and when you are. And if you can do that through in life and in painting and in running or whatever you do, then actually I think you stand the chance of living a more fulfilled life. So for me, the making painting is a sort of exploration of that relationship. And then as such, it's sort of transcendental. It's kind of asking painting to say, not so much can I transcend it, but can I embody it? Can all of those things coalesce in my relationship to color, line, form, shape, image on a surface? I believe they can. I mean, it's not easy. Just as living a fulfilling life is not easy. And nothing like that is easy. But actually, I suppose what I'm saying is that perhaps sometimes we look in the wrong places for the solution, and the solutions are nearly always the relationship to our values, ourself, and those people, things, places that we exist, or the color I put on a canvas.
How do you manage distraction? Because I know that both creating art and running with that kind of commitment require you to be very much focused and centered. How do you manage the daily distractions of running an art business, of being a human being navigating the world? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I mean, it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about and working on. And I think it's one of the things that if you've been an artist for any length of time and you've survived and you're doing quite well at it, you've got quite good at it. And for me, I have a sort of a set of rituals and activities I do every day that really help keep me focused, centered, and allow me a kind of sense of awareness to my relationship to it. So I always start the day with meditation every day. I break the day up in the middle of the day by going for a run. So that's a kind of rhythm to the day where I start the day, hopefully, with a sense of kind of curiosity and awareness and openness to what I'm going to find in the studio, to the world outside. And then I like to run in the middle of the day, because I'll do sort of maybe 6 hours in the morning in the studio, stop, go for a run, and then again do another few hours in the afternoon. And I find that breaking the day up in a way and going out into the real world and just allowing thoughts to float, not controlling them, not constructing them into structures, just allowing them to float through my head as I move through the landscape, is a really constructive way of not only dealing with the problems I might have come up against in the morning, but actually structuring some solutions for the afternoon session. So those sorts of things for me are really sort of significant. I mean, there's little sort of strategies I have throughout the day. Like I've kind of worked out over the years, I can't do anything for more than about 40 minutes to an hour with any level of focus. And if I do more than that, I start losing concentration. So what I do is I sort of built this habit now, stopping about every 45 minutes to an hour, just for 5 minutes. I'll read a few pages of a book, have a cup of tea, have a coffee, and then carry on working. And I find that I get through a lot of books, which is quite nice, and also it takes my mind away from the work for a moment, and it takes me into another world. Even if that's, it doesn't have to be fiction. It can be anything. It could be poetry, fiction, could be factual literature. It doesn't matter, as long as it in a way shifts my functioning of my brain into a different sort of thought process sufficiently long enough that when I come back to making the work, there's a sort of freshness to it. It doesn't have to be long. I mean, I find even just a few minutes is sufficient, but it's kind of got to be long enough that it creates a sort of slowness to my pace. And actually, that's quite interesting, the idea of slowness, because one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given as a runner is if you're not enjoying it, slow down. And I often say that to myself in painting, that actually if it's going wrong, slow down. And nearly always what we do in life is when things are going wrong, we speed up. And it's a sort of, it's like, a kind of fight or flight mechanism kicks in, which kind of works when you're in obviously very drastic situations. But in everyday life, it's not very helpful and actually stops the brain functioning effectively and stops your curiosity and awareness developing. So one of the sort of little strategies I often have when I enter the studio in the morning is I try to do it slowly. So I literally walk through the studio slowly. And it's kind of a habit I've built up now, and I sort of just do it naturally. I don't really think about it. And the days when I don't do it, I always have a bad day. So I always kind of kick myself if I lose the habit of doing it. But I think that kind of slowness allows you to sort of reconnect to things. So in running, it's sort of, okay, if I slow down my pace, start recognizing the beat of my heart and my breathing patterns and the pattern, the structure and the pace and the rhythm of my legs moving across the landscape, the feel of the ground, its hardness, its roughness, its softness, all the things that give it its character. It sort of drives a kind of energy and allows you to kind of reconnect to something. So that sort of slowing things down is another sort of strategy I like to approach in getting through the day. I mean, largely these things sort of happen instinctively now, but I guess if I've had a very difficult week or two at work, making new work, and it's not going very well, it's very easy to slip into bad habits. So that's when I have to be a bit more sort of self-conscious and think, okay, slow down, take a bit of time, don't race. It's not a race. Just get to the other end as effectively as you can. That's all you got to do.
Do you find that you, in terms of your approach to creating the work, do you work on just one piece at a time, or do you find yourself dipping between various pieces? And what is the length of time? I know that it can vary greatly, but what does it look like from start to finish for you? Is it a slow process?
I mean, I make a lot of work at once, so I'm probably only really working on about maybe 3 a go, and I'll move between those throughout the day. So I don't spend too much time working on one painting, and one of the reasons for that is because when you focus too much on something over and over again, you start making judgments about it. You start saying, is it good or is it bad? And judging something to be good and bad is a real no with creativity. It closes your creativity down and it starts to slow down the process and makes painting slowly. So I try to move between works to stop that happening. And I might have anywhere between 20 and 30 paintings on the go at once. And they vary from small, maybe 20, 30 inches or sort of 50 centimeters up to, 200, 300 centimeters. So, they vary in scale quite a lot. And I'll only be maybe working on sort of 5 or 6 very large paintings at once. They can take anywhere up to a year to make, but they don't take that long on each one. I might work on it for a day and then I might not touch it for 2 months. And then I might work on it for 5 minutes and then I don't touch it for 2 months. So I guess all in all, I mean, they probably take about a week, but they take a long time to sort of generate into what they are. And for me to sometimes happen very quickly. I mean, sometimes I come in and I'll make a big painting in 3 days, but that's quite unusual. It's quite unusual to be in a headspace where that's possible. The smaller works can happen quite quick, so I can make some sort of 3 or 4 in a day, but that's unusual again. I don't often do that. I make lots and lots of drawings, so I probably make a good few thousand drawings a year. Wow. Drawing is something I do all the time. I mean, I'm not, I get up, even eating breakfast in the morning, I'm drawing. So I always have a sketchbook on me. Wherever I go, I have a sketchbook on me. And I'm always drawing in that. And then I'll do sort of more sort of studio-based drawings in the studio, which are more kind of experimental things. And then I go out and I draw. So I go out, just wander around and draw in the landscape or just whenever I'm going. And I don't really go out with any sense of what I'm going to draw. I just go and wander around. So I'll just draw anything, I'll draw a stick on the ground, or I'll draw the view, or I'll draw a tree, or I'll draw a building, or I'll draw, a river meandering through the valley. I try not to think I'm going with a plan of drawing X or Y. I just go out and try and experience the world and respond to that experience with a line on a piece of paper. And I find that it's one of the things I think as I've developed and matured as an artist, it's one of the joys of being a painter, is being able to just respond to the world with a line. It's really beautiful. It's elegant. It's engaging. It fills you with a sense of anticipation and curiosity. And it has a kind of rhythm to it, which is, if it's going well and you're connecting well, it almost feels like falling in love in a way. It's kind of weird, sort of exciting moment, but it's subtle. It's not a kind of passionate lust. It's a subtle realization. And I like, something I kind of cultivate that by doing that probably 2-3 times a week. I go out just for 20 minutes, not for long. Sometimes just taking the dog for a walk. Dog gets a good walk on those days because I, take my time, so he wanders off. But that's all I find that's been a really sort of helpful thing for me to do over the years.
So in terms of the measures of success that you've had as an artist, I mean, you've exhibited the world over, your artist CV is pretty extensive, but you've also, you are presently an artist lecturer at the National Gallery of London. Now, most people know that success does not happen overnight. What are some of the failures and challenges that you've perhaps had along the way that you'd be comfortable sharing?
I've had many failures. I think the issue is not whether you have failures, because everybody has failures. The issue is really how you respond to failure. And I try not to think, again, it's that kind of judgment thing. I don't try to judge it. I don't look at success. I try to look at success and failure exactly the same way. So I don't think success is good, failure is bad. I look at it and go, what am I learning from it? What am I getting from that experience? And the failure might make me feel uncomfortable, and the success might make me feel good. But the good and the discomfort and the good is not necessarily helpful. They're just feelings. What matters is what you derive from the experience. So one of the things that I've sort of learned over the years is to think about what are my values, as not as a person, but as my life, but also as a painter. And if I understand what those values are, what the core values of my life are, and my practice as an artist are, it's much easier to make decisions about the impact of success and failure on what you do. Because if you get sort of financial success, or you get reward from people saying that's good, it's very, really nice, but it can actually lead you astray if it's not the right response to what you've done. It might actually take you in the wrong direction. If you've got a sense of actually what you're really about. So for me, one of my life values, for example, is being effective. I like to be effective in what I do. I like to do things effectively. It's I don't like doing things kind of ineffectively. I mean, artist support players is a good example of that, really. And also in my work, one of the things I often do is I like to work in layers. So, if somebody says something about my work, which opens up that relationship of layers and how to be more effective in using those layers, then I know to listen to that. I know to go, oh yeah, okay, that's something for me to work with. That's something I can work on. I mean, I'm not sort of that descriptive in the way I do it, but I think having a sense of what that is, and even things like, our support pledge is based on a kind of the idea of a culture of generosity. And that idea of generosity is really important to me as another one of my kind of life values. That I think if you think about your creativity and your relationship to your work, to your peers, to your environment, to your community, creatively and generously, it's much easier to derive something from that. It's helpful for everybody. So if you're mean-spirited in the way you think about your creativity, you're going to kind of build walls around it and protect it. It's not going to grow. You've got to be able to expose it and generously expose it to other people and say, this is what I've done. This is my best shot. What do you think? That takes quite a lot of courage and generosity of spirit to do. but also you've got to generously accept what they respond to it with, which is another act of generosity. So knowing those things about yourself, I think for me is a really useful way of decoding the failings and the successes of life. So I can feel the failings and I can feel the successes and I can enjoy it and I can feel the discomfort of when it goes wrong. But at the end of the day, I've got to put those aside, and those things don't last very long. They might last a few hours even. So they're not something really you can use as energy or as material to work on. You've got to look more closely at the experience and say, what does it do? How does it inform my learning? And how do I move on from that?
So let's talk about the Artist Support Pledge. So it's now had over 170,000 posts, and the economic modeling suggests that it's generated an estimated $20 million or dollars and pounds, 20 million pounds for artists and makers around the globe. So first of all, for anybody who's not familiar with it, please tell us exactly what the Artist Support Pledge is.
Okay, Artist Support Pledge is a sort of cultural movement, put simply, and it is that you post work on your Instagram account and you put the hashtag Artist Support Pledge, and you can't charge more than £200 or $200 for the work. Once you reach $1,000 worth of sales, you pledge to buy another artist's work for $200 or up to $200. So you might buy multiple pieces, but for $200. So the idea is that the culture and the economy works by people come into it, they buy work from the artists at a good price because it's a low entry, it's a low ceiling price. And the artists, once they reach their £1,000 threshold, $1,000 threshold, have that they then support their peers. They support the network that they are a part of. So they're able to buy other artists' work. So it has that kind of act of generosity when you enter the system, because you're putting work on at a fairly low entry price level. And when you reach your threshold of $1,000, there's another act of generosity by supporting one of your peers. And then you can start again and keep doing it as many times as you like. So it was sort of, I guess the idea really is that it generates a very rapid and immediate economy, because money comes in quite quickly and it gets spread across the system quite quickly, because it can only go so high. As most of our consumer economies go upwards, and the further you get to the top, the richer you get, but the fewer people there are. So with this, you can't do that. The money has to go sideways and it goes across the economy. So it's a very quick economy. It's a very rapid economy. It develops very quickly and pushes money across its system. So more people are supported by it.
So once you hit your $1,000, do you have to purchase from somebody who's also using the hashtag Artist Support Pledge?
Yeah, that's the idea. And really, because it's about kind of pushing that economy across the system. And if people start buying outside of the hashtag, then it sort of seeps back out of it. And so by keeping it within the system, anyone can join it. I mean, I'll make that clear that anyone who has an Instagram account or wants to set one up can join it. There is no entry requirement. You don't have to even be a professional artist. If you decide you're an artist or a maker in any way, shape or form, you are welcome. And so because of that, it's a very, it's a generous culture. It's an open-ended, generous culture. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier about it's based on sort of hunter-gatherer cultures, that they don't have status, they don't have hierarchy. And when food is gathered or a hunt is successful, that food moves across the community. It's not kept by a single individual. So it's about sort of making sure that, in effect, everyone is fed. And I had this sort of two principles which I took. One is that everyone is fed, and that the cash that comes into the system moves across the system. The other one is sort of the campfire principle. In hunter-gatherer societies, if you have no food, all you have to do is go to the campfire of somebody who does, and the obligation is that you are fed. So I think of our support pledges like the campfire, that if you come to that campfire, then the obligation for the community is to find a way of feeding you. So it's sort of a kind of, it's a moral contract from the start. I mean, the pledge is a moral contract. I can't police it. There's no kind of legal bond there. The only kind of legal relationship that goes on in it is the exchange between the buyer and the artist. And that's very simplistic. I mean, it's literally buyer messages artist, buys work. There's nothing complicated about it. So I like that idea that it's an economy based on customs and cultural values rather than legal systems. Because of that, it's a very fluid culture and a very fluid economy. Because when you have legal economies that are based on taxation and consumer products, it's a very slow economy. It takes a long time for money to filter through it. So this is a very rapid economy, and the money filters across the system very quickly. And because of that, it means that more people are supported, because it sort of seeps through. It's a bit like water in a sieve. The water just filters out. You can't keep it in. You can't build, you can't protect that water in something that's got lots of holes in it. It just filters across the system.
It's incredible, brilliant. When did you come up with the concept? Because it seems to have just snowballed very, very quickly during the pandemic. Was it something that you had brewing for a while, or did this just come about from perhaps a long run? some
both.
Ideas?
Yeah, well, it's kind of both, really. I mean, I came up with the idea on the 16th of March, and I'd been sitting at my computer in the morning just answering emails. And I noticed that I was getting a lot of messages, not only on my emails, but on my phone, texts, etc., saying, exhibitions closed, galleries closing, work's coming to an end. And this seemed to be nearly every other message. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, this isn't very good. A lot of artists, they work in gig economies, so they are always on the end of the kind of the pay structure of anything. And if money stops, they get nothing. There's no support structure for them, nothing. And I knew that even if the government came up with some support structures for the unemployed, it was very unlikely that would work for artists, because their income streams are all over the place. So that it's very difficult to prove income for many artists consistently. So I knew that this was going to be pretty drastic for a lot of artists. I literally just sat down and I thought, okay, what can I do to help? And I thought, okay, what are my assets? So I wrote a list of my assets, the things I thought I could use to help. And I came up with two, not many, but two. And that was artwork, got plenty of that. And most artists have plenty of that. And the other one was a culture of trust and generosity. And I've been developing this idea of this culture of trust and generosity for about 12 years now, through a number of projects I've done, and through my work, really, through the context of how I think about, make work, how I talk about my work, and a set of projects I do called Artist Support Projects, which is a sort of peer mentoring project for established mid-career artists to support one another over their career. And it works through this culture of trust and generosity. So we try to develop other projects from small groups of artists, no more than sort of 4 to 6 in a group. And they not only support one another, but they try to generate new projects which support artists around their group. And often kind of quietly. So they don't do it with bells and whistles on. It's sort of quietly just helping people out. Little things like, once a month, if you can help another artist just by connecting that artist with somebody else, it might be useful to them. So very subtle shifts in behavior that kind of, I believe, create a different type of culture, and a much more productive culture for artists. So I had this network and culture already in existence, already there, and I had artwork, and I thought, okay, well, it's got to be artwork that wouldn't normally sit within my normal gallery relationship, because my gallery wouldn't let me do it. So I never, with my current gallery, I don't show prints. I have shown with other galleries, but not with my current gallery. and I very rarely show drawings. So I've got lots of drawings and prints, and I really like these drawings, and I've always wanted to show them, but I very rarely get the chance to show them. So I thought, okay, I'm not the only one who's got this. There's lots of artists like me who have all of this stuff lying around in their studio, which never gets seen in galleries, but it's there, and it's worthwhile, and it's worthy of a market in itself. So I thought, okay, can I create a market for it? Can I create an immediate market for that? So that's when I came up with a $200 point, because I thought, okay, that's quite low. It's low enough that it's below my normal market value. So it's an act of generosity for me to put on. Anyone who knows my work and follows me will know it's a good deal, so they'll go and buy one. So I thought, okay, it's going to generate an immediate economy. And then I thought, okay, but how do I help sustain other artists through that? So, okay, I've got to then help them financially too. So that's when I sort of came up with the idea of the pledge and the idea that, okay, but then it was about trying to decide what price level that was. And initially I thought, okay, when you get to $2,000, then you give $200 back, sort of 10%. Mm-hmm. But I thought that's just not generous enough. It's not kind of painful enough to really work. It's got to be sort of slightly discomforting to sort of give that money back. It's got to be enough for you to say, that's a bit of a hit, but I'm still going to make some money. So I thought 20%, that's quite a big give back. And given that, it's still only $1,000 that you've made. So I came up with that. I sort of tested it. I thought about it for a few hours. I went for a run, and it was actually on the run when I did all the thinking. Came back, and then in the evening, I sort of asked my family what they thought of it. And they're normally a pretty good judge of any crazy idea I have. And they didn't come back with anything that was too negative. They just sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, yeah, why not? So I literally just sitting watching TV in the evening, made a post, put a print of mine on, an etching, wrote a bit of text about how the pledge worked, posted it on Instagram. And then, so this was probably around 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, I think. And before I went to bed, 2 of them had sold. I thought, oh, that was quite quick. Wasn't expecting it to be that quick. And then I got up in the morning and I was one off making a pledge. So I looked on the hashtag and 2 artists had joined it.
Wow.
I thought, okay, that's all right. I'll buy one of theirs. So by lunchtime, I sold the next one and bought one of their works. And in the meantime, I sort of thought, okay, maybe if I just pushed it a bit harder, maybe a few more people could benefit. So that's when I came up with the red tile that now is familiar everywhere with Art Support Pledge. It's very basic. It's very simple. It's meant to be kind of very, nothing flash about it. It just says what it is. And I sent that around to all of my network of people who are involved in this generous culture. And I said, please just repost it and join in if you fancy it. And then I went to the studio. And then by lunchtime, my phone was sort of pinging every few seconds. And I was thinking, okay, this is gaining some momentum. So I looked at the phone. I think there was around 200 and something people on the hashtag. I thought, that was quite quick. So I went in the house, went on my computer and started just sending it out a bit more and just trying a little bit harder. And then by the evening, I was getting more than 2 messages a second. My phone was just completely, consistently lit up with messages. There was no stopping it. I couldn't look at anything other than the messages. And at that point, I realized it was going to be huge because the numbers on it were still quite low. I mean, there was still only maybe in the hundreds still of people actually on the hashtag. But what I knew at that point was it was growing. It was going to be much bigger than that because people were messaging me saying, I'm going to go on it. I've just got to get my work ready and all the rest of it. So I knew that there was a bit of a lag in people actually getting onto the hashtag itself, but there was certainly a lot of people interested in it. So the following morning, I got up and I literally just went to work. In fact, actually, I don't think I had a following morning. I think I pretty much went through the night on that first night. But the following morning, I sort of sat down. I wrote another list of what I thought this thing needed. And I thought, okay, I've generated a culture. I've generated economy. What does an economy and a culture need? So I wrote a list of things. One of them was obviously the platform already existed. I wanted a learning platform to go with it. And I needed a kind of form of award systems and donations. So I then sort of emailed friends saying, anyone willing to give me $1,000, £1,000 to create an award so that we can actually help build this quicker. I thought if I can give out £200 a time to help people reach their pledge, it will generate the goodwill to reach that point of generosity. So I think by midday, I generated 10,000 to do that.
Wow.
So I still wasn't even 24 hours into it. And then I got I think it was maybe that night or the following day, I got an artist called Keith Tyson, who's a friend of mine, came back to me and said, I'll give you £5,000 to the scheme. And I've also got this really good idea to do an art school. And I thought, brilliant, that saves me having to do it. So he set up Isolation Art School. We sort of linked the two platforms. I mean, they're separate, and Keith runs Isolation Art School, does all the content and develops all that. But because by that point I already had, I think by then maybe 2,500 people on it, and it was growing very quickly. We realised actually it was convenient to link the two, because then we could push both out across the platform quite quickly. So within sort of 2 days, we had all that sorted, and we had a guy who's working on a virtual gallery space in collaboration with Hastings Contemporary, which is the contemporary art gallery, public contemporary art gallery near where I live in East Sussex. So we had all this pretty quickly within 2 days, and then it kind of went on like that for a few weeks. I didn't get any sleep for the first 3 weeks. It was pretty much consistent. Answering messages, developing the platform. And by this point, I actually didn't have an Instagram platform for Artist Support Pledge. I was doing it all on my account. So I realized pretty quickly that if I wanted to stop the many thousands of messages coming to me, I had to set up a means for people to find out what to do and how to do it. So I set up the Artist Support Pledge account on Instagram, where you'll see all the information, the how-to guides, how to do it, and also just cultural activities, things, ideas, sort of thoughts about what the culture, a generous culture is, because it's a movement and a culture. It's not a system in a way, which is the system's very simplistic. The process is very simple. So what makes it work is the relationship between the culture, the economic process, that it's 20% in, 20% out. It's very simple. It's mirror image. There's nothing complicated about it. And the way Instagram works and the way a hashtag works, which again is very simple. And so each transaction is very simple. And that kind of made it, I think now looking back, is one of the things that made it work and made it go viral. Because it was very easy for it to go viral. It wasn't complicated for people to understand. So I got the account set up, and then I got, over the next couple of days, I sorted my website out so that there's a part of my website dedicated to all the information people need to know, kind of frequently asked questions for press, because then I was getting sort of 4 or 5 press interviews a day, every day, 7 days a week. Wow. And that could be quite tiring. So, just dealing with that, and some of them were 20 minutes, so it wasn't particularly difficult. So just making sure that all the information was there, that I wasn't just getting repeated questions over and over again, and that, if the press went to the website, they could get the standard questions answered straight away. And then since then, really, it's just been about developing the culture of it, maintaining the integrity of that, which is one of the hardest things of it, because there isn't a sort of centralized governing kind of center, if you like, that can be policed. It's a culture that has to self-police, and it has to rely on the goodwill and the integrity of the message. So that message needs to be consistently repeated, clearly, and I need to maintain the context for it, because one of the things that so often gets misunderstood in the press with it is that they just see it as a selling platform. Okay, it's just a way for artists to make money who need money. And of course, that's what it is. It's there to make money and support artists financially. But that completely misunderstands the context of it, because it's a culture, and economies are a part of a culture. If you take the two away from one another, they don't work. So if you can create an economy and a culture that mirror one another, with a code of ethics that mirror one another, with a set of relationships that are good for the community and for the individual, and in this context, for the environment, in the sense that actually it's about sustainability, it's about creating models of sustainability and saying that perhaps we can survive on less as long as everyone is fed, which is very different. I mean, it sounds very easy to say, but it's not the way we live. We tend to live in a way where we say that, but actually what we do is we live in a world where, you know, the rich get richer and everybody else struggles. And actually, I wanted, you know, you can't get away from that completely. So there is a sort of, there are sort of obviously people who are going to do better than others, but you can only do so well on the platform. There's only so much money you can actually make because you can only process so much work at that price. So there is a limit to how much money you will make. And once you reach that limit, that money then starts getting pushed across the system, because if you're doing quite well on it, you're spending 20% on buying other artists' work. So one of the things that artists repeatedly tell me is it's so exciting to be able to buy their colleagues' work, to be able to support their peers, and to build and to have that as a goal, to be able to become a patron of the arts by selling your work is really empowering for artists, because it's not something most artists ever think they're going to get to do. And then suddenly to be able to say, well, that artist I've been buying for years is on it, I'm going to buy one of their pieces. And then it gives you that kind of impetus to try and sell your work so you can support somebody else. So it kind of reverses very subtly that idea of what success means. Success is not about having, success is about giving it away. So it's sort of, you know, I talk about as a kind of sustainable gift culture that is egalitarian. So it's trying to create a culture of fairness that is sustainable, that is about passing the gift on. So even just things like, you know, I talk on the account about thinking about art as a gift to the world rather than as a product. So when you make art, you've gifted to the world a set of relationships and values, which is special. Now, you might sell that to somebody, but actually, the way I like to think of it is that you're not selling them the art, you're giving them the art as a gift, because that gift is going to keep growing, keep giving. What they're giving you in return is the finances to make more gifts, the time to do it. Which I know it sounds like a subtle shift, because ultimately you're selling somebody a piece of artwork. But I think as a set of values, it's much healthier as an artist to feel that way about what you're doing, to think, okay, I'm giving to the world something special, and they are generously giving me the time in return to do more of that.
So the art world has not traditionally been known as a generous place. And you have been a part of the art world and the major institutions and the exhibits and the galleries. How do you feel they'll respond to this as it continues to grow?
Yeah, I mean, that's been really interesting. And what I think is curious about this is I completely agree with you, but also completely disagree with you. The reason for that is that I think typically the art world that we see every day is exactly that. It's not a generous place. It's a place often of greed and of elitism, and of a lot of gatekeepers keeping things to themselves. And the way I see it is, well, you get the art world is the product of the values you live by. So if we just shift our life values, we'll get a different type of art world. We'll get a different type of artist. We won't get the egocentric, greedy artist. We'll get an artist who wants to give things to the world. And I think that naturally, that's how artists feel about what they do. And that the current art market actually forces them to be something they're not natural at. And yes, you can find artists who are like that, just as you can find other people who like all sorts of things. But I think, I mean, you know, call me an optimist, but I think deep down, everybody gains a much richer life by acts of generosity than by acts of greed. And yes, you might be a little bit poorer, but if everybody's a bit better off, then actually I think we're all richer. So it's a win-win situation. So in a way, I think that what my plan was to create a culture and economy that naturally tapped into the way artists feel about how they make their work. And there's a lot written about the history of gift cultures and the anthropology of gift cultures, and that's its relationship to artists. I mean, there's a really great book by Lewis Hyde called The Gift, which talks about, you know, art as a gift, and that art has traditionally, throughout human history, been part of gift cultures. And it's actually only really in the last few hundred years that we've had an art world, well, since the 17th century, that we've had an art world that has been about an object that you buy and put on your wall. So actually, it's a very small part of cultural history. And in a way, all I did with this was tap into, I think, a kind of natural river that's already there flowing underneath the surface of the art world, with a market and a product that was already there in the artist studio, and gave it a voice through a set of values and a cultural system that was very easy to understand because it's not complicated, and people naturally flow towards it, and understood that.
Do you feel that this is perhaps the tipping point for where art becomes less of a commodity and more of a gift?
Yeah, I've had that asked a lot, especially by people in the art world. I don't know. I mean, I'm not naive. You know, I don't think the art world's suddenly going to, and the world we're living in, suddenly going to stop being greedy when things go back to whatever normal is. I think if I'm going to be optimistic, what I'd like to say is that I think what I've proved is that we can have other economies that exist alongside other economies. So I don't think we have to have a one-size-fits-all economy. And actually, it's a bit like education. We don't have to have a one-size-fits-all education. And I think one of the failings of education and one of the failings of economies is that we think that one system fits everybody, and that one way of doing it is going to fit everybody, and it just doesn't. You know, so all I've actually done really is to show that there's a way for artists to sustain a lifestyle, to sustain a living, to invest in their practice, to be part of a community, without having to rely on a economic system that actually doesn't provide for them. Even when they're part of it, it struggles to provide for them. Other than a very small elite, most people struggle to survive within that system. And I've been lucky in that I've been part of that system, but I'm fully aware of its faults, you know, and I think in a way, what I hope with this is what it will do is show that there are other ways of doing it. Actually, it's already created the economy, so hopefully that will continue. We're working on that. And I think that maybe it might just, if it's had any real lasting legacy, it might just tip the way we think about our relationship to art, the values that we attribute to that relationship, and why we buy it in the first place. You know, so I think one of the things that I didn't expect, I get a lot of messages from artists just saying thank you very much. I also get the same amount of messages from collectors who I didn't expect that. You know, I didn't really think that they would be so grateful. And one of the things that, and it's not just collectors that already exist, it's not just people who already buy art. It's a whole new breed of people who have always been interested in it, but it was just out of reach financially, or they were a little intimidated by the way the art world works, or sort of felt like the price that was being asked didn't seem to reflect what their relationship to it. That it was quite hard to get an understanding of that, because maybe they hadn't built an understanding of the art world and the value of what they were buying. And what this does, because it levels everything out, everyone's at the same price roughly. You don't have to worry about it. You can just go dip in and say, I like that, I'm going to buy that. And it's not so expensive that I can take a risk on it. And so you can develop your tastes and your interests in a fairly risk-free way. And I think that's really compelling. I mean, it's amazing how many people have become collectors through doing this. And the long-term effect of that, who knows? I mean, it might be that, you know, collectors in 10, 20 years, when they are more established, cut their teeth and started collecting on our support pledge.
I'm all for a more democratic art landscape, 100%. But, if I were to play devil's advocate, do you worry that it may impact your value, the value of your, your regular priced work?
Yeah, I mean, I've had this conversation with my gallery all the way through. I've not been naive about that. I've been careful. I've not put work on that is too compromised. Some of it, yes, but whenever people have sort of approached me with that problem, or artists have approached me saying, "I'm a bit worried about this. What do I do?" My view is this really. Yes, there might be a little compromise, but I think it's a compromise worth making. If you can make a more sustainable income and you can help other people around the world do that, I don't mind compromising. It's and if a few people might have lost out a little bit, that's fine. I can live with that because there's many people who are benefiting from it. So it's and actually I've not had any problems. I mean, collectors of mine who have bought work off the pledge have been more than happy. They've not complained. They've not said, but I've spent a lot more than this previously. And they understand the context. They understand the magnitude of what this has done in terms of creating, a world economy and support structure for many, many artists, not just a handful, but artists across the world.
And you could look at it from the flip side and say that it also raised your profile pretty significantly.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not what I expected. I didn't have this on my to-do list of things to do, and so it has. I mean, I don't know what the long term, in the long term, what that will mean. I don't know really. I don't know how I'm going to go back to being normal, whatever that is. And I'm working on trying to find a way of balancing life as art support pledge and life as Matthew Burrows the painter. I'm getting there bit by bit. I'm having to establish our support pledge as a more sort of sustainable enterprise and funding mechanism so that we can fund it. And I can employ people to run it, because at the moment I'm running it. And, as it gets global, I think a lot of people around the world don't realize it really is just me on the end of a phone. And some days I get over 10,000 messages, so it's not easy. It's not a sort of easy life. I'm not sitting there twiddling my thumbs.
Right. I can 100% relate to that, because I put my own art career on hold for a decade to build Conception Arts. So I lacked that balance for a long time, but I'm finally returning to the studio and getting back to it. So I wish you luck with the balance.
Thank you, Rachel.
You certainly have the structured approach to to life in terms of your running and your daily habits. So I'm sure you will do just fine. So we are going to see if anybody has any questions. So folks out there listening or watching this morning, if you do have any questions, do jump into the comments. And I guess my final question to you would be, what's next? Do you see this kind of idea of a generous culture being applied to any other industries? Are you thinking a little bit more broadly? And where do you think that this goes from here? Well,
there's a number of issues there. I have looked at taking it into different sort of sectors of the arts. It's not worked yet. I've not found a model that's worked, and it might be that it can't. So I've got that in the background always, and I'm always talking to people about it. In terms of moving forward, we're establishing Art Support Pledge now so that we can actually get not only public funding, but we can start raising funds from our support pledge. Because at the moment, it's just me, and it's my bank account that's paying for everything. And I don't want to keep doing that forever. And I didn't quite realize how expensive it was going to be running a global movement. So there's a point where I'm going to have to start getting money elsewhere. But that we're getting there, and I'm also working with other organisations. So the Crafts Council England are helping out at the moment, adding a bit of admin support and PR support to reach out to more makers. And I'm also talking to the Arts Council England as well, and a number of other people who I can't say yet. But we are looking at taking it to a more established sort of platform, if you like, as a means of taking it forward, so that we can actually continue it, and it isn't just a blip. It's not just you know, a kind of wave within a time in history, that we can actually establish it as a formal kind of culture and economy for artists to work in and through. And there's a number of ways I think we're going to add to that over time. And, you know, how do we connect that with things like, at the moment, which we're going to launch very soon, is how we connect that with museums and galleries. So especially how galleries and museums develop collections through our support pledge, but also going forward how the commercial sector might want to relate to our support pledge, because there's quite a big gap between what is the art support pledge and what most galleries sell art for. So if we can find a way of bridging that gap and of supporting one another through whatever the next phase is, I think it, you know, it might have room for maneuverability there.
Well, congratulations. Thank you. I think it's just an incredible initiative, brilliant, profound, you know, potentially could change the landscape from here on out. So thank you for your incredible work on this. And, you know, here's to a generous culture. Tell folks where they can learn more about the project and where they can also learn more about your artwork as well. Okay, so if you want to go on to Art Support Pledge hashtag, all the information for how to do it is at Art Support Pledge on Instagram. Or if you go to www.matthewburrows.org, which is my website, but on there there are some pages dedicated to our support pledge that tell you how to do it, frequently asked questions, and you can actually cut and paste information from there to put onto your art support pledge account, or you can take the logo and the text by reposting from the Instagram account. If you want to look at more of my work, then you can go to www.vigogallery.com, which is my gallery in London. And if somebody wants to purchase one of your works that are available via the Artist Support Pledge, are there any remaining, or are they all gone? Yeah, I'm putting some on every day, partly because I've got to fund everything, so I have to find a way of doing it. So I know I try to put stuff on every day, and I know we put that on the evening here, so it'll be sort of just after breakfast in America. Okay. And if you go to @Matthew Burrows Studio, which is my Instagram account, you'll see works that are available on there. I'm putting this into the comments right now. All right, folks, go check this out. Go learn more about Matthew. Get involved, artists. Get involved in this incredible movement. This is just, you know, so profound, so wonderful, and we are so grateful that you were able to join us this morning, Matthew. And thank you for such an in-depth dive into this this amazing new venture. So that is it from us. We will be back again same time tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks. Bye for now.